Morning, everybody. Here we are, ripping from the headlines as usual. And this week we're going to be looking at COP26, climate change and Orthodox Judaism. You see in the first headline, source number one, Pope, other religious leaders issue pre-COP26 appeal on climate change. Pope Francis and other religious leaders made a joint appeal on Monday for next month's UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, to offer concrete solutions to save the planet from an unprecedented ecological crisis. The Faith and Science towards COP26 meeting brought together Christian leaders, including Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby and Orthodox Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, as well as representatives of Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, and Jainism. I didn't know there was such a religion. I had never heard of Jainism. Anyone else here heard of Jainism? I don't know. I haven't seen it before, but
I can't find the source sheets.
it's in the chat. Everything's linked in the chat. I'll put it there again. Otherwise, you'll just have to accept it as Torah Shabbat Bet. So these are the religions that they had a statement to take action, and so that came out last month. The COP26 conference, for those who are not familiar, source number three, the UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties. That's why it's called COP, Conference of the Parties, in Glasgow on 31 October through 12 November. COP26 summit will bring parties together to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it is still going on. All the big wigs were there last week, but it's still going on. It's still going on now. So that is COP26, and we see that it became an issue of religion wanted to weigh in advance of it, and there's been more conversation about the role of faith in climate change. In particular, we're going to be looking at the role of within Orthodox Judaism of the responses, reactions to this conference, and in general. Judaism in the environment is an issue we've explored before. We'll revisit a couple of themes relating to that, but in particular, with regards to Orthodox Judaism, in particular, reaction to climate change, because I would say, I'm someone who follows generally, a lot of the Jewish media, what's going on in the Jewish community, my part of the community and beyond, and there really wasn't that much attention in the American Orthodox community that was being given towards COP26. Certainly a lot less than in other parts of the Jewish community, but there was an interesting headline last week. Source number two, rabbis call on Bennett and Biden to take climate conference seriously at COP26. Rabbis in the United States and Israel called on the leaders of their countries to take issue of climate change seriously ahead of a gathering of world leaders to address the issue. A group of major Israeli Orthodox rabbis, largely from the modern Orthodox community, wrote a letter calling on Bennett to treat climate change as a matter of the utmost importance in a letter Friday. They called climate change a matter of worldwide pikuach nefesh, invoking the Jewish legal term for the requirement to preserve life, a requirement which overrules nearly all other commandments in Jewish law. And so there was a letter that was sent out that was signed. It was written in Hebrew, obviously, signed by some rabbis that some of them are not familiar to many in the modern Orthodox community here, but some of them are. So, for example, some of you may remember Rabbi David Stav, who has spoken before in our community. Rabbi Shlomo Aviner, a prominent religious Zionist rabbi, more in the more nationalist camp from Beit El and Ateret Yerushalayim in the Old City. Rabbi Yaakov Ariel, Chief Rabbi of Ramat Gan, one of the senior rabbis in that community. Yuval Sherlow, Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Rimon from Alon Shvut, Rafi Feuerstein, the founder of the Tzohar movement. Other names, but these are some of the more well-known names. Those are larger profiles even outside of Israel. And the letter, and really it goes into encouraging Prime Minister of Israel we ask you represent the complete partnership of the state of Israel in the global effort on this issue. Although our country is small and our impact minimal, our partnership in this global effort is likely to be very significant. Certainly you will do this with open eyes, taking care to avoid possible manipulation, but simultaneously also with willingness and dedication to this critical issue upon which the world's future depends. The eyes of many in the world are lifted towards us, to the source of the major world religions. From Zion shall go forth Torah, in the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udvar Hashem miYerushalayim. So that was appeared in the press last week, and so there was a rabbinic move to encourage Israel's fullest participation. The rabbis noted that this year is a Shemitah year. That's a sabbatical year, which has its own environmental overtones. But that's also just highlighting the Jewish connection to showing concern for the environment, which we'll explore at greater length now. And also, thank you, Carla, for letting us all know what Jainism is. Belief, knowledge, and conduct. Sounds a little bit like Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadik. Anyway, for another time. So, any questions, comments, reactions to this the COP26, or the religious faith role in it, or the Jewish involvement in it? All right, so we're going to try and do two things this morning. One, we're going to look at some of the Jewish religious or halachic or spiritual aspirational sources that relate to how we are supposed to treat the environment. That's one. And two, we're going to try and understand why the Orthodox voice on this issue is muted, as well as that, reviewing some of the segments of the letter, there's not much of a call to action found in the Orthodox community when it comes to this. There's a lot of aspirational, let's be involved and let's participate, but how about some concrete actions? And we're going to try to understand why it might be hard for the Orthodox community to be involved in that. So we're going to kick it off with a very familiar source to anyone who has dealt with Judaism and conservationism, or Judaism and the environment. Source number 4 from Kohelet Rabbah, where we are told to look at God's work, for who can straighten what he has twisted? When the Blessed Holy One created the first human, he took him and led him around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said to him, look at my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. And all that I have created, it was for you that I created it. Pay attention that you do not corrupt and destroy my world. If you corrupt it, there is no one to repair it after you. Right? Adam and Eve are told, right, that they are meant to spread out throughout the world, and they're supposed to subdue the world. They're supposed to rule over the world, but that comes with responsibility. You can't destroy the world. The idea that it was created, and we are the custodians of that creation to do our best to ensure that it remain and not be damaged or destroyed. And this kind of an aspirational call to partner with God recalls to mind the last passage of the opening paragraph of Kiddush on Friday night, where we're describing God resting on Shabbat. And it says, Kivo Shabbat mikol malachto asher bara Elokim la'asot. Because on this day, God rested from all of the work that God created. And then it says to do. So how does it make sense that God rested from all that he created to do? Just say God rested from all that he created. So the Hasidic interpretation of that extra word to do is that God rested from everything that he had created and given man to do. The idea of our partnership with God is part of that. And this midrash is reflecting that. This midrash is reflecting the idea that God, from the very beginning, entrusted humanity as custodians of ensuring that the natural order remain and exist without being damaged, without being destroyed. Now, it's an aspirational message, which has very practical ramifications. So, for example, Bal Tashchit, we're not allowed to destroy, and that's one of the commandments. It's commandment number 529, source number 5. The root of this commandment is well known. It is in order to teach our souls to love good and benefit and to cling to it. And this is the way of the pious people and of proper action. They love peace and are happy for the good of the creatures and bring them close to Torah, and they do not destroy even a grain of mustard in the world. And they are distressed by all loss and destruction that they see. And if they can prevent it, they will prevent any destruction with all their strength. Right? We shouldn't waste. We shouldn't throw away. We should. We don't want to, even a grain of mustard shouldn't go wasted. Right? The idea of the idea, the mindset of not wasting is, on the one hand, sometime throughout Jewish history, born out of necessity, born out of economics. Right? You don't want to waste because you don't have. And much of Jewish history, most Jews were of very modest means. So, some of even the way that some of Jewish food developed was because of that. Right? Cholent was a way that you can put a little piece of meat and create a meat dish, even with very little. You mix it all in, and who knows what's in there. Or, for example, gefilte fish. Right? Gefilte fish is a way to grind it all up, bones and all, and get the most out of stretch it a little bit more. Has an added legal advantage in that it avoids any issues, Shabbat legal issues relating to removing bones. But at its core, it also is economics, but we don't want to waste. Right? Think about the amount of waste that we see in terms of food, just because it's so readily available. It's essentially within our financial means to have it. This was something that, whether organizations in America like City Harvest realized, or in Israel, they have organizations like Leket that, what about all the food that goes to waste? How do we ensure that it is properly, it doesn't go to waste, and it gets utilized? That's the mindset of the Baal Tashchit. There are specific rules relating to Baal Tashchit that you can't throw away things that have utility. For example, Lag BaOmer was a holiday that became associated with bonfires. And one of the rabbis in the 19th century, the Chatam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer of Pressburg, was against Lag BaOmer, because what they would do for the bonfires, they would throw clothes in. And he felt that if you have clothes you want to get rid of, there's probably better ways or better recipients than to throw them into a fire. That's the idea of Baal Tashchit. That's the idea of not wasting. Questions or reactions?
Yeah, Rabbi, I have a question. You hear me?
Yes.
In the Bible, aren't there several instances where Israelis or Jews, whatever that they were at the time, go in and destroy cities?
Right, but that's battle, that's war. In fact, the Torah specifically talks about the idea of not destroying fruit trees unless, if at all possible, unless you have to do so to fight the battle against your enemy. So there's always a sensitivity. That's not kind of a mitzvah. That's part of the narrative of going out to war. They say you should not destroy the fruit trees, but sometimes you have to destroy. Sometimes you have to destroy an entire city, but that's not considered wasteful. It's an essential byproduct, a necessary byproduct.
They are not clearly always defined as battle. In some instances, if my memory is correct, they willy-nilly go in and destroy people they don't like, who are not necessarily at war with them.
There is destruction again. Any destruction in the Torah is I guess, I would call it sanctioned destruction. You have to destroy the 7 nations that are in the land. You have to destroy Amalek. You have to, you have other nations. You have to give them a chance. You have to offer them terms and peace first, but then afterwards, if they reject it, you can go to war. But I think that the idea of wanton destruction of property or material that has utility, it goes against Jewish law. You have this idea that we are custodians of the universe, of the physical creation. We have to do our best to ensure that it not be destroyed, or because it's not going to be replaced. At the same time, this has certain concrete practical teeth in terms of how we shouldn't waste. Now, what's considered wasteful? One could say, just like as an example, if there's 7 people coming for a meal, have 7 pieces of chicken. To make an 8th piece of chicken that might go to waste, don't do that. Okay, is that halachic obligation? No, the idea is to do the best that we can. And as we're going to see, it's sometimes difficult to quantify the specific actual practical obligation of conservation. But we're supposed to have that mentality, and there are examples within, or there have been examples in within Jewish law throughout Jewish history of situations where certain practices were forbidden or were discouraged or were criticized because they were not sensitive enough towards conservation. So that's how I would respond to that. Any other questions or reactions? So more often, the way that rabbis and religious leaders have looked at this idea, and you get a little bit of a sense from the quotation we have from the Sefer HaChinuch. Sefer HaChinuch is counting the mitzvot, trying to show some of the laws. But a lot of this is going to be attitudinal. It's going to be aspirational. It's going to be a mindset which will hopefully lead us to take proper care and concern for the world around us and not to waste and the like. So if, for example, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch is going to be describing this idea of looking at the universe around us and looking at resources as having the proper mindset. Source number 6 from his 19 letters. The same thoughtful regard which you show to man, show as well to every lower being, to the earth which bears and sustains all, to the world of animals and plants, to your own body, to your own mental faculties, to your ego which is most of all your own. In the same justice which you owe to other human beings, Mishpatim ask of you, the rules ask of us to regard all beings as God's possessions, destroy none, abuse none, waste nothing, employ all things wisely. The kinds and species of plants and animals are God's order. Mingle them not. All creatures are servants in the household of creation. Respect even the feelings and desires of beasts. Right? This is a mindset more than it is specific call to action. He mentions the idea with regard to sensitivity to all creations and animals. There's the idea, of course, also of tsar balei chayim, not causing pain to animal. We talked a little bit about that last week with the shechita ban and slaughter in general. Look, obviously, we do cause pain. We kill the cows before we eat them. But Rav Hirsch is utilizing the sentiments expressed in the Midrash and the content of the or the intent of the mitzvah of Bal Tashlis, and not to cause pain to animals, Sar Balei Chayim, to create a certain mindset of how we should act responsibly towards God's creation. Rav Kook takes this in his mystical and in artistic and creative way. If you are amazed at how it is possible to speak, source number 7, hear, smell, touch, see, understand, and feel, tell your soul that all living things collectively confer upon you the fullness of your experience. Not the least speck of existence is superfluous. Everything is needed. Everything serves its purpose. You are present within everything that is beneath you, and your being is bound up with all that transcends you. Right? This is, Rav Kook, the poet, the mystic, the spiritual personality. Story is told of Rabbi Aryeh Levine walking with Rav Kook, and they were walking, and he absentmindedly pulled a leaf from one of the bushes, and Rav Kook chided him by saying, "Who are you to take that leaf off? It's serving its purpose on the bush. Why are you pulling it off?" That type of response. Maybe the leaf's purpose was to be pulled off by the other rabbi, but the idea that there's a certain ideal in not imposing our will or forcing ourselves upon nature. This may sound a little bit like with regards to Shabbat, right? They talk about what kind of work is prohibited on Shabbos. So we're not allowed to do mulacha, right? You're allowed to have yigiyah, you're allowed to have effort on Shabbos, right? There's nothing that says you can't carry a heavy bag up and down the steps 10 times on Shabbos. It's not the best Shabbos activity. You might, get all tired and sweaty, but it's not prohibited. It's not the effort per se. It's the creative action. The way it's described is that on Shabbos, we pull ourselves out of the equation and we stop inserting ourselves to overcome the natural order. Right? We stop and let things go. And that's what sometimes raises some unique challenges and questions about the way that we do use the world on Shabbos. Just as one example, the Shabbat is described as Shabbaton, right? Shabbaton we use popularly to describe a Shabbos weekend, a high school Shabbaton or a youth Shabbaton or a shul Shabbaton, people coming together. But Shabbaton, used in the Torah, Nachmanides understands it as describing a positive commandment to create a restful atmosphere. And for Ramban, for Nachmanides, this opens up the whole discussion of what's Shabbos appropriate, or in Yiddish, what's Shabbosdik and what's not Shabbosdik. And with Ramban goes to describe that Shabbos has a certain mentality that a person has to have, and a certain behavior, which means stepping back and not inserting oneself into the creative realm. So, for example, when Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked about Shabbos clocks, using timers on Shabbos, he invoked Nachmanides as saying, no, Shabbos is a time when we step back, and having a timer turn on something for us on Shabbos, is no different than us asking someone to do it for us, which is also problematic. And we're supposed to step back. And the consensus seems to go against Rabbi Feinstein. Rabbi Feinstein allowed it for lights and heat because that had been the tradition throughout Jewish history of having the Shabbos going. The non-Jew do things relating to the lights and the shul and the fires for heat, but he's very against Shabbos timers or Shabbos clocks. And when you think about it, you can really set one's factory on automation these days. So there's, the Nachmanides, some 800 years ago wasn't so far-fetched in recognizing that you have to ensure that a certain mentality or a certain attitude is maintained with certain actions avoided, because you're trying to take a step back and appreciate the world. So that's what Shabbos is, and anything that goes against that would be a prohibited Shabbos activity. And you see the same spirit in how Rav Kook is looking at our role with creation. We're part of creation. Certain times we have to dominate and take charge and overturn the creative order, or the created world for our purposes. But otherwise, we're part of everything else. We should step back. That's the way we understand, God's statement to Adam and Eve in the Midrash, right? We're part of creation. We have to do our best to maintain creation. Sometimes that means stepping back and letting creation run its course without our interference. And so whether it is, whether that is a kind of an appreciation for humility, whether it's to appreciate the grandeur of creation, but to recognize that our role within nature, sometimes we can partake, but we also have to recognize that it's also to maintain, which sometimes means stepping back. Questions, comments, reactions?
Another allied subject has been very.
Well, I can't hear you, Al. All right, we're having a little problem with your audio. Yeah, all right, so Al, the sound isn't coming through. Maybe too far from the...
That in Israel, there's
Yeah.
a company being sued for hacking, and the American government has castigated Israel as a result.
Look, I think I'm not sure that's an environmental issue, and we'll see how that issue plays out, and there could be other items there, maybe another headline. But I think that what we're laying out a foundation that Judaism aspires towards our taking care of the environment, requires us to take care of the environment in certain ways. At the same time, it more often than not leads to the advancement or the encouragement of a mindset for having this approach, but maybe it's a little bit weaker when it comes to suggesting practical course of action. And that takes us into sources number 8 and 9. Source number 8 is from an article back from 2012 about Judaism and climate change. It appeared in a journal called Yale Climate Connections, Yale University. So, and Halper talks about this in particular. Though Jews as a group have been active, the philosophy on the need for environmental activism varies among the different branches. They follow a type of continuum, with Reconstructionists being the most left-leaning, then Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox, which consists of the most observant. Troster, a conservative rabbi, says that the Reform and Reconstructionists have done a much better job on the national level, with the Orthodox, the more inward-looking and least open to the outside secular world, having done the least. That pattern holds true the further to the right you go, he said, with Hasidism, the most observant sect, entirely isolated and opposed to the modern science of anything having to do with the secular world. However, Troster says there are pockets of activism within all Jewish communities. He points out there's much action occurring among more secular Jews. So, recognizing that here we have a claim being made that is the more observant the Jews, the less active they are on environmental issues. But it would seem a little bit strange considering the mindset which is being advocated with great thinkers like Rav Kook and Rabbi Hirsch. But maybe also touching upon that it's more about the more inward focus of these of the more observant parts of the Jewish world. The more inward you are, maybe the less willing you are to expand one's realm of activity into environmental action. Yes, Phyllis.
Well, I'm sorry, I had to get on a little late. Wasn't there an organization that provided a hechsher not only for kashrut, but for ethical sourcing of food and materials?
So there wasn't. It was about ethical, but it wasn't about materials. It was about proper business practices and paying the right wages and things of that sort, or committing to do so. So it was less, in particular, it was less environmental and more on the business, on the treatment of one's workers. Also an important issue. And maybe the fact that that's not automatically part of kosher supervision highlights, another area that maybe and we'll see this play out in the next source. Kosher is about certain rules of the food, less so about some of the other practices of the overall company, which opens up a whole host of other issues. Now, the next paragraph here does talk about efforts made within the Orthodox community to promote more environmental awareness and action, right? And so the challenges increase when efforts turn to mobilizing Jews within the Orthodox movement, which historically leans to the political right. Ivan Marzuk recalls being one of only 3 Orthodox Jews at a Kojal event in 2001, which is about environment in Jewish life. She founded Kanfei Nisharim in 2003 to fill what she sees void, engaging Orthodox and protecting the environment. The Orthodox community is not always comfortable with a non-Orthodox approach, which she says often involves fixing the world in a way that isn't religious. And the Orthodox are preoccupied with taking care of their own community, focus on the needs of Orthodox Jews, she said in a phone interview. She created educational materials with a Torah-based approach indicating protection of the environment is indeed a Jewish issue. For example, she linked the Orthodox' hand washing and Orthodox tradition with water conservation. She pointed to the Jews' historic relationship to animals as a basis for enlisting the involvement of Orthodox rabbis. Marzuk has created a teaching related to Jewish learning and the environment for every portion of the Torah that is read in synagogue each week. Her efforts have borne fruit. She says 150 Orthodox agents of change use her materials to inspire them to protect the environment. The head of the Orthodox Union also signed them to Kojal's climate change pledge. So there's been some efforts made, and you can look at Confident Sharm's website, you look at Kojel's website. You notice that she found it difficult to find ways for there to take action on the subject, instead focusing mainly on education. And in particular, as the last paragraph of source 8 mentions, Marzuk says she faces a greater challenge when it comes to climate change, an issue that often breaks on political lines. Orthodox Jews watch a lot of Fox News, which mirrors their socially conservative views and presents a more favorable perspective towards Israel, she says. Rather than try to convince the skeptical community that climate change is occurring, she focuses on support for water conservation, other actions Jews can take in keeping with their faith, that what God provides should be used wisely. Interesting that the action that she mentioned most in connection with this article has to do with water, which is used in the ritual hand washing several times a day, and maybe that being one that might resonate with the Orthodox because it's something that they use, and maybe there's something that can be that's in their toolkit, toolbox of activities to focus on that. So here we see, maybe one of the challenges within the Orthodox engagement with environmentalism in general, climate change in particular, has to do with the overall or the focus of the Orthodox community, more inward, focused on its own needs, which leads it to maybe ally itself more with those views and voices and organizations that complement those views and activities and ideals. If an organization is very environmental and doing good things on the with regards to climate change, but isn't really friendly towards Israel, that could be a very big problem. And we see that playing out more and more these days with intersectionality and different other organizations that are excluding organizations that are Zionists, even if they share other policy goals. So that's one area that requires some. That's one of the reasons why the Orthodox may have less to do with climate change. Another approach, touches on a couple of similar themes. Chagai Reznikov wrote an article last year in the foreword, where he starts off by saying, source number 9, why haven't the Orthodox flocked to join the fight against climate change? Right, you had 150 rabbis sign on. You had rabbis who are encouraging now Prime Minister of Israel that Israel should be on the vanguard, the forefront. First of all, Orthodox Jews tend towards social conservatism, and climate change is usually championed by liberals. Right, an idea that was referenced in the previous source. In addition to the intrinsic suspicion this may evoke in the Orthodox community, there's further concern that supporting environmentalism will be seen as a general support of the liberal agenda. This intersectionality problem is exacerbated by the association of many environmental groups with ultra-liberal Israel activism. Right? He puts it straight up that it's very difficult when the organizations have a veneer of being more progressive and more activist on issues that go against what the Orthodox community is going. That makes it difficult for the Orthodox community to be interested. The second, and this is a little bit different than we've seen so far, but I think it makes sense with how we looked at the sources, that religious value statements like those above, values generally without making specific demands on the individual or community. Right, a lot of these are statements we want to make change in the environment. You have to be more, conserve more. We have to, they're talking about on larger scale things relating to, to carbon emission and things of that sort. These statements struggle to motivate people to seriously engage with issues like climate change, which calls for significant economic and personal sacrifice. Compare this to the authoritative and compelling nature of halacha, Jewish law. Because of its specificity and binding obligation, halacha is unique in the Jewish canon and demanding action. And the Orthodox regularly prioritize halacha over economic and creature comforts. We pride ourselves on living under the authority, willing to make life changes based on halachic demands. A lot of the discussion around the environment is aspirational or value statements. That's not so simple for the Orthodox community, which is used to, what time is Shabbos? What can we eat? What can't we eat? Right, we're willing to put ourselves out at times and to stretch, to stretch our comfort levels, whether it be Sukkot or whether it be Pesach, as two examples. right? You know, we put 5 or 6 fast days on the calendar where we don't eat and drink. At the same time, when it comes to the environment, a lot of it is aspirational, and you know the finding a way to come up with the halachos of how a Jew should relate to climate change or the environment are more difficult. We should love the earth, and we should protect the earth, and we should be, you know, focused on these things. But you know, as my Rebbe in high school, post high school yeshiva in Israel, okay, what's practically, what's tachlis? And we see that in the letter that the rabbis wrote to Prime Minister Bennett last week before the conference. Israel should be involved. This is pikuach nefesh, but what exactly are we supposed to do about it becomes the challenge. And so while Judaism has aspirational values for us in our identities to respect the environment and see ourselves as part of the larger creation story, and do our best to appreciate each and every piece of that creation and not to waste it. And there are real rules against hurting animals and against wasting things. When it comes to the environment, once you get down to the way the environmental and climate change conversation are taking place, one, it's taking place mostly by people who have much broader worldviews in the Orthodox community, where a lot of our focus is on maintaining our community's institutions and values. Right? I've mentioned before that when they did a survey within the modern Orthodox community, what's the number one concern? And they listed things like, you know, intermarriage or education or Israel. The one which ranked the highest was affordability. Right? Because there's an internal focus that we're trying to maintain. It makes it harder for us to look beyond that community, especially when those who are most active in that space are not necessarily sharing those values or maybe involved in activities that go against some of our values. And it's much easier for us to do things. It's much easier for us to do them when you tell me what to do. And much harder when we're talking more, you know, be more conservationist and the like. And so I think that's, you know, at the end of the day, climate change and Orthodox Judaism, yes, it's part and parcel of our approach to the world. At the same time, it's the landscape of that makes it harder for us to be more specifically involved, or with regards to have specific action items for what we should do. And I think that you know, we'll continue to play out, you know, and hopefully, hopefully there'll be some resolution. Look, just as it's hard for the countries of the world to figure out how they want to approach it, al achas kama v'kama, how much more so for the halachic community, when we don't really have a specific item in front of us where we can provide an action item, and an action item that people will pay attention to in the halachic community. That's what makes it so difficult. And I think that's, you know, was noticed by those who are studying the state of play in the environmental community, as well as within the Jewish environmental community, why the Orthodox seem to be absent.